The number of Australians aged over 80 is expected to triple in the next 40 years to more than 3.5 million. That means more of us are going to access aged care. A government-appointed task force has been looking at how we fund that dynamic into the future. The task force followed a damning Royal Commission into the sector. Connolly's reporting originally caused that Royal Commission. She joins me now. And it's a big report, you've only had a day, but what have they recommended?
Well, essentially, they've ruled out an aged care Medicare-style levy, which is what the Royal Commission recommended, and they've said it needs to be a much more user-pay system. So it currently is, because actually Australians contribute $5 billion a year to residential care. The government puts in about $30 billion a year. But now what they're asking for is people who have assets, who have super and who have a home should contribute more to make it a more equitable system and to fund the rest of the actual service.
Now, I know it's only been today, but what's been the early reaction to that recommendation from the task force that people with more money contribute more?
Well, in terms of the government and the opposition, there seems to be pretty much bipartisan support. However, just judging by the number of responses that we've received from the public, there's a lot of people who say, well, I'm a self-funded retiree, I've worked very hard, I've been taxed all my life and paid taxes, I'm now being asked to pay for aged care, and what guarantee do I have that that money is actually going to go into care and not into the profits, because there are for-profit providers in the sector and a lot of people have concerns about that, especially after the Royal Commission and all of the damning evidence that was emerging there.
So just explain how that works. Do we know yet what they're talking about in terms of people making contributions? Is it a complex scheme where different people will pay different amounts? What are they suggesting?
Well, it is actually very complex. It's a very high-end report. There's lots of different charges for home care and residential aged care. But one of the things that I think people will understand, I mean, it's an extremely far-reaching report. In 1997, John Howard introduced the idea of accommodation bonds. So people had to sell their houses in order to pay those bonds. And they're like interest-free loans for providers to buy real estate, to invest, to make money from it. Now, those accommodation bonds still exist. They're called refundable accommodation deposits. Now, up until now, they've been entirely refundable. So when that person dies, the family receives all of that deposit back. Under this scheme, the providers would take a percentage, about 3% per year, up to a total of 5 years. Now, for someone paying an average refundable accommodation deposit of $500,000, that's $70,000 that they would be paying extra. For people paying $1 million, which is not out of the question in metropolitan areas, they'd be paying $150,000 extra.
Now, do we get any sense of what they get in return? Can they negotiate what they actually get if they're making that extra financial contribution?
Well, no, this is just to pay for their accommodation. The government task force has said, and the government agrees, it seems, that these are reasonable expenses, that these people would be paying for accommodation and living expenses if they were living at home. Why shouldn't they pay for it in aged care? The problem is, of course, the concern is, where does that money actually go? Is it going to go into better care? So there's no promises from the government or the task force that there should be more nurses, that everybody will be trained in aged care, and that's a Royal Commission recommendation that the government has completely ignored, a minimum training qualifications. And on the other hand, there's a lot of serious incidents still happening in aged care, about 13,000 per quarter. I mean, we're talking physical assaults, neglect, and even sexual assaults. I mean, at this point, 40 sexual assaults or illegal sexual contact in aged care per week. That is an astounding figure that has not changed since the Royal Commission. So if people are going to be asked to pay a lot more money, they're going to want to know, has my home been complained about? Has it reported these shocking incidents? And at this point, there's no transparency on that. No one knows which homes are worse, which ones have had lots of complaints, and which one has the best care.
So in terms of what the task force is saying, Is there no recommendation that this amount of extra money should come with the kind of transparency that you're talking about?
Well, they say that the Taskforce says that this will just fund better care, it will foster better investment in the sector, so it will be financially viable. But the government and the industry seems to think that the aged care sector is pretty much fixed since the Royal Commission. And I think the figures, not well known by the public, would suggest that that's not exactly the case. And there needs to be a lot more transparency if people are going to be paying this a lot more money.
I mean, we'd want that kind of transparency anyway, right? But clearly, if they're asking people to pay more money, then you would expect there would be some consequence for that on the providers. But I guess that's going to come out in the debate that follows now. So tell me about that. You said that it looks like there's bipartisan support, at least initially today, or at least a sort of acceptance that there's some arguments to look at here. So what does happen next?
So the government has a really short deadline. The Aged Care Act is due to be passed by July 1. There's a draft act and it has a whole section which is blank, which is about fees and funding. So the government has to decide which of these proposals from the Taskforce it's going to take on board. I think that they're probably going to run them up the flagpole and see what the public reaction is. There's so many different suggestions for funding. And then they've got a very short time to get it out. And that's one of the things the opposition has complained about already, that where is the opportunity for older Australians to start that debate and talk about it, or is this going to be rushed through to get that funding security that aged care providers want?
Just to understand how the Taskforce worked, presumably they did take a lot of testimony from older people during the hearings or the meetings to discuss what was going to be recommended.
Well, the Taskforce, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, the Royal Commission cost $100 million and it went for 2.5 years. The Taskforce went for 6 months. I mean, they met once a month. They said that they did some round table discussions. They had about 180 submissions. But in terms of aged care advocates or older people, the Taskforce is dominated by providers, ex-public servants, financial experts, and this is a proposal that the aged care providers and industry have been pushing for years, and I think that bipartisan support, they're probably going to get their way.
Anne Connolly, thank you for coming in and sharing your significant expertise in this area. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.